President Trump believes people should see Special Counsel Robert Mueller's final report. Trump, speaking to reporters, said it's up to Attorney General Bill Barr to decide what to do with Mueller's findings. Trump repeated that there was no collusion between Russia and his 2016 presidential campaign. An Arizona mother with a popular YouTube channel remains jailed on $200,000 bond following her arrest for alleged child abuse. Michelle Hobson is accused of harshly punishing her 7 adopted children for not performing well in videos. Dean Muccio, NBC News Radio.
I'm finally getting my abs back thanks to TC1 Gel. I gained some inches around the belly last year and the holidays didn't help either. But then I discovered TC1 Gel and now 2019 is the year of my abs returning. TC1 Gel is a thermogenic gel that you rub on your waist 15 minutes before exercising. Then simply put on the TC1 sweat belt and start your workout. You'll sweat like crazy and feel the burn. It focuses on boosting circulation, increasing perspiration, activates body heat, reduces muscle fatigue, and burns off more calories. Get your TC1 Gel now. Go to tc1gel.com and use the code RADIO30 for a 30% discount on this amazing product. Again, RADIO30 is a code for 30% off the regular low price of TC1 Gel. You can also go to www.tc followed by the numeral 1 gel.com. That's TC number 1 gel.com. TC1gel.com. Get rid of a few inches and get your abs back with TC1 Gel. Also, follow them on Instagram, handle TC1 Gel.
Are you having trouble sleeping? Are you always tired and worn out? Is it affecting your work and personal life? Well, South Pacific Sleep Lab can help you out. South Pacific Sleep Lab provides a personal study of your sleep patterns. With their trained specialists, they will diagnose your sleep habits and will give you a prognosis for getting a great relaxing night of sleep. South Pacific Sleep Lab has locations throughout Southern California, including Fontana, and will provide transportation to any of their locations at no cost to you. To find out more, give them a call at 844-SAD-5050. That's 844-SAD-5050. South Pacific Sleep Lab. Start resting easy and sleeping sound today.
Talk 102.3 FM Riverside. Thank you, America, for making us radio's number one format for 8 years. Talk 102.3 FM Riverside. KCAA, the station that leaves no listener behind.
Welcome to U-Turn Radio. Here at U-Turn Radio, we believe in big-hearted communities and small government. Join your hosts, Nadia Renner, Tom Murphy, and Eric Steinman, as we work to put local governments on a diet and champion the charities that support your community. So come on, join us and let's turn it around.
Happy Thursday. Welcome to U-Turn Radio. We have a little crazy weather this week. I feel like we had a beautiful day.
Last week we celebrated like spring being here, and it went away for a little bit.
And today it's raining out here in the Inland Empire. But happy Thursday. Thank you for joining us. Today is National Single Parent Day. I didn't know that day existed, but today we celebrate National Single Parent Day. So shout out to all the single parents doing the double work out there. Hey.
It's not easy. My daughter's a single parent. She lives with us, so she gets a little help from us, maybe a lot of help from us, but it's a grind.
Oh, I can only imagine. I don't have kids. I have a dog, and that's work alone. So I can only imagine having babies and being a single parent. So shout out to all the single parents. Today we have an amazing show. Usually here at U-Turn Radio, we concentrate on local politics and big-hearted communities. But today we're really taking the time and concentrating on the big-hearted community. We also have Eric joining us via telephone. Welcome, Eric.
Hey, Nadia.
So today we have, we're going to concentrate on our big-hearted community and highlight Children's Fund, which is an organization based in San Bernardino, with our guest, Sherry Hunk, Director of Marketing and Public Relations. Welcome. Thank you for being with us here at U-Turn Radio.
Thanks for having me.
We're so excited. We usually, like I said, talk about politics. We've had great shows. You can always go to uturnradio.com to check out those previous shows, like the one we had last week, right, Tom?
Yes, yeah, and please do. And email us if you have questions or concerns.
Absolutely. You can go to info@uturnradio.com if you want to send us an email. Also, you can call in and voice your opinion. 909-792-5222. That's 909-792-5222. You get rewarded if you call in. I know I said that we're concentrating today on the big-hearted communities, but you can call in, and what we usually do here. Tom, why don't you tell them what we usually do when we spin for charity here at U-Turn Radio?
Oh, when we spin for charity, any caller who calls in, we have a little spinner here, and we'll hit it, and wherever it lands, U-Turn Radio will donate to that person's favorite charity. So caller calls in, we have a little conversation, get their thoughts, and then we spin the wheel, and wherever it lands, we donate that to their favorite charity.
That's right. But today we actually have Cherie Hunk, like I said, Director of Marketing and Public Relations of Children's Fund. How did you get involved in Children's Fund, Cherie, and how long have you been in your position?
Well, I've been in marketing and communications for about 20 years, and that was my career. But also, in my spare time, I worked through a service group and worked for the prevention of child abuse. And about 3 years ago, I had the opportunity to combine the two, to work in marketing and communications and work to help children who are being abused and other vulnerable children in the county. And that's when I went to go work for Children's Fund.
Nice. You grew up here in the Inland Empire?
I did.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Is it different when you grow up somewhere and you get involved with a charity where you grew up?
I think so. I'm fully invested in my community, and I raise a family here. My family plans on staying, so I want this to be the best community that there can be. So yes, I think it makes a big difference.
Oh, that's really cool. What about if you share, we'll just get started and have you share a story with us or an experience that with Children's Fund that you've had so far?
Okay, well, it's hard to pick just one, my favorite experience, but just this week I was reading some scholarship applications. One of the great things that Children's Fund does is we provide scholarships for foster youth who want to go to college. And you know, there's very few foster youth who actually graduate with a 4-year bachelor's degree. It's about 3% nationally. And so at Children's Fund, we want to increase that. So we know that one of the barriers is finances. So we provide scholarships for foster youth. And one of the scholarship applications that I read this week was about a young boy who was living in hotels his whole life with his family, and his stepfather sexually abused him. So he and his sister were taken out of the family and placed in foster care. But then his older sister, sexually abused him in foster care.
Oh, wow.
So he was removed from his sister as well. A couple years went by and he was adopted by a loving family and who reminded him of the importance of education. In his scholarship essay, he said that he knows that education is the great equalizer and that being educated will help him stop the cycle of poverty and abuse. And so it was very important to him to continue on going to college. And so he's, on Thursday, will be receiving a $1,000 scholarship from Children's Fund, along with 24 other scholars just like him.
Amazing. So you said you're picking one out, or you're going through these applications. What is it that you guys do at Children's Fund?
Well, at Children's Fund, we kind of like to say we divide our work into 3 pillars: providing support, providing opportunity, and providing hope. And under the support category, you'll find our emergency needs program, and that's where we're giving children things that they need to survive: clothing, beds, refrigerator, backpacks, things like that. In the opportunity category is where you see us funding education. So we have the scholarships I mentioned and several other scholarships, and mentorship programs at Cal State San Bernardino and Cal Poly Pomona, where foster youth can get the emotional support that they need as well. And then in the hope category, that's where we're providing hope for children who've been sexually abused and abuse and neglect. And this is a medical treatment center at the Children's Assessment Center where children go to get treatment and also find hope again.
You mentioned the scholarship work. Excuse me. Do you work with foster kids after they, quote, age out of the foster system?
Absolutely. The county has a independent living program department of Children and Family Services, and that's where those children go to learn life skills. So when they age out, and then after they age out, they have somewhere to go to get some help with anything that they could possibly need.
Okay, so the county has that program, and then Children's Fund would kind of, if you will,
Augment.
Augment.
Yep.
I was going to say sweeten the deal, but
Exactly.
augment is probably a much better term there.
That's
with
right.
scholarship help for
That's right.
folks going.
Yep.
Okay, very good.
How did Children's Fund get started, though? Like, when did it start to help out and get involved with the community?
We were formed in 1986 when Patrick Morris, the Honorable Patrick Morris, you may recognize his name as the mayor, previous mayor of the city of San Bernardino. He was a juvenile court judge, and he saw children, foster youth, come into his courtroom needing things such as eyeglasses that a bully had broken, or things like that the county could not provide because of limited resources. So he said to his good friend, Jack Brown, the previous CEO of Stater Brothers, he said, we need to do something about this. And so together the two of them formed the nonprofit Children's Fund. And we were formed as a public-private partnership with the county as the chief fundraiser for the foster kids. About 5 years later, A. Gary Anderson came on board to sort of strengthen the foundation that was already laid and help stabilize the organization financially. And with those three men as founders and co-founders of the organization, we've been around for 32 years, and we're helping children every year.
How do you pick, like, how do they come to you? How do the kids come to the organization, or do you guys go and seek for them? How does that work out?
That's a great question. When people think of nonprofits, especially a children's nonprofit, you would think, you would go to our office and there would be tons of children running around, that we were a direct provider of services. But that's not what Children's Fund does. We are a nonprofit that funds and equips our partners, which would be departments in the county and nonprofit agencies, to serve children directly. So think of us as a chief fundraiser, and we provide other nonprofits who actually are doing the hands-on work with children.
Yeah, okay. What are some of the ways that Children's Fund would actually raise funding to distribute?
That's a good question. Because we're a 501c3, we depend on donations, grants, and our contracts with the county departments. So we have contracts with every county department that is a child serving department that provides some sort of service to a child in the county, has a contract with Children's Fund. We provide them goods, in-kind goods, and they provide us dollars for our operational support.
Okay. I got you. I got a question about that in terms of you said every, I guess, department in the county that provides children's services. What which departments?
What's that mean?
Which departments? I mean, I know there's a child support services.
Obviously, Children and Family Services. They run the foster youth program.
Okay.
That's the number one and the biggest one. But also probation department has youth who are probationers, but also probationers who have young children who may need something. They are also eligible for help from Children's Fund. Behavioral health is a big one, preschool services. So pretty much any department that's touching kids in any way can come to Children's Fund for help.
Okay.
For as far as like school, they have to wait for them. You usually work with them like after high school, or do you work with them throughout like middle school, elementary, that type of stuff with the foster kids?
It's throughout their entire time in foster care. And we don't just help foster kids, we help all vulnerable children. So one thing that we like to say at Children's Fund, or that we think is unique, is that sometimes we'll help a child in preschool services with giving them, say, a literacy program that they learn to read. And then 4 or 5 years later, when they're in elementary school, they may find that they need new school clothes and their parents can't afford it. So we'll help them with new school clothes. And then a couple years later, they may need a backpack and school supplies. We'll help them with that. Then they get into high school, they may need some sports equipment or a scholarship for after-school youth activities. We'll provide that. There's prom extravaganza. We help with that. And then when they're going to college, they may need a scholarship. So sometimes there's some children that over the entire course of their lives, Children's Fund has touched them several times.
Yeah, I was reading poverty issues are 1 in 4 children living in poverty. That's 260 to 280K children in just the San Bernardino County. That's crazy.
Just in the county. If you go to a playground and you look at the group, a quarter of those kids on that playground are living in poverty.
Wow, I didn't know that at all. So you guys work with all different kind of kids. What is a organization, why is it needed here other than the numbers that I just gave, but what makes it a different for Children's Fund to be involved with the county?
Let's just focus on last year. If Children's Fund didn't exist last year, there would 118,000 points of services would not have been provided to children. And by that I mean 37,000 kids received a toy at Christmas. And that may not seem that important, one toy, but to a child that has been told his whole life that Santa Claus brings toys to good boys and girls, if they don't receive a toy, they internalize that they're bad. And that's not the case, and that's just unacceptable to Children's Fund. So we do everything we can to make sure every child in San Bernardino will have a toy at Christmas so they know that they are good, that they are worthy, and that they are loved. 300 families last year would have been homeless if they didn't receive rental assistance from us. Sometimes people fall on hard times, and through no fault of their own, they're just short a little bit for their rent money. And we help them so that they can stay in their homes, keep their children safe, and not end up on the streets. And we have lots of examples. 1,700 children received beds. There's over 18,000 kids sleeping on the floor in San Bernardino County. And so every year we do what we can to make sure that they're getting a brand new bed, brand new bedding, and pajamas to go with it so that they have a comfortable place to sleep so they can go to school and be ready to learn the next day.
How hard is it for you as an employee of this organization to deal and see these type of issues in the county? And you mentioned your mother as well, right?
Yeah.
So how does that play?
It's I focus on the good that we're doing and not the children that we aren't reaching because of resources. So it makes me feel good every day. But sometimes, for example, when I was reading those scholarship applications and I read the stories of these kids, it does get to you sometimes because you think, how could a parent do that? Or, how could this child be so hopeful for the future after having the past that they've had? But then that in itself encourages me to keep going on and helping.
What about you guys? I was reading that you guys been around since 1985. What's another story that you can share with us that you're or that because you've been with the company with the organization for 3 years.
Yes.
But maybe within its time, a highlight story that you guys really share with everybody as an organization.
There is a story that I like to tell just because as a mother, I just can't imagine that this would happen, but it did happen. There was a girl named Anna, and she wrote a letter to Children's Fund and asked if we could please provide braces for her teeth because she had crooked teeth, and she had experienced some bullying at school by her friends. Her friend group told her, don't smile anymore, your teeth are ugly. And she was devastated by this, so she went home to her mother and said, Mom, am I ugly? Because my friend said I'm ugly when I smile. And her mother said, yes, you look like a monster when you smile. And she was devastated by this, so she wanted to fix her teeth. And so Children's Fund reached out to her social worker, and we worked out a program where we provided braces to her. And over the course of 2 years, she would send us pictures of her progress. And about 3 years ago, we got a letter from her that had a picture of a bright, shiny smile, and her telling us that she was so thankful that she got braces from us. And she said that she was so thrilled that she changed her email address to Anna Smiles because now she smiles so much. So I love that story.
That's a great story.
That is a great story.
Let me ask you a question. It doesn't sound like you said there's not a lot of kids running around in your building. How does somebody access care from the Children's Fund? You mentioned a family that maybe couldn't pay a bill or something like that. How would they access?
This is another category where we're a little bit different than most nonprofits. When we are helping a family or a child, it's not directly the family doesn't contact Children's Fund directly. All the people we help are through some sort of case management. So it's through their mentor at Big Brothers Big Sisters, or through their counselor at the high school, or a social worker if they're in foster care. Those organizations have established a relationship or a partnership with Children's Fund, they are able to then have the social worker or the caseworker reach directly out to us and advocate on behalf of the child or the family.
Okay. You said social worker, caseworker. Is all of your agreements, are they governmental, or do you have a nonprofit channel that would be maybe outside, county services, something like that would just come to you and say, hey,
yes.
Okay.
We have about 55 nonprofits throughout the county that we have a MOU, or a memorandum of understanding with. And that just means that when they are working with a family and they identify a need, they reach out to Children's Fund. And because they have this agreement with us, that means we've already vetted them. We know that they're an established nonprofit doing good work, and that our donors' money and the resources we have for children are going to an organization we know that's going to spend it well on behalf of that child.
Okay, so it would almost be more, setting, I guess you will, the government supply chain, if you will, aside, for a nonprofit that needed to help somebody, just knew they didn't have the resources, they would come to Children's Fund and say, hey, can you fund this need that we've identified?
Exactly. Like, for example, at Christmas time, most nonprofits have some sort of Christmas party for the children that they serve, but they can't provide all the toys for all those children. So they would partner with Children's Fund. We provided the toys to them, and then they gave them away at their Christmas party.
Okay.
So we had 85 nonprofit agencies that received toys from us this past year.
Okay, very good.
What's your guys' relationship with local government? How do organizations like yours get involved? Being that you guys are working with, we're talking about foster kids, you talk about the people that oversee the kids before they go into foster care and that type of stuff. What's your guys' relationship with local government?
One of the best things about Children's Fund and what makes us unique is that we are truly a public-private partnership. Mm-hmm. So we were formed by the county. And about, for the first 20 years of our existence, we were funded partially by the county through the general fund. But about 10 years ago, we stopped that relationship, and instead of receiving a donation or a grant from them every year, now we earn it through our contracts. But as I mentioned, our partnership with the independent living program, the foster care program, we sort of augment and collaborate with them to get the work done that they need done. A good example that's happening in June is their sports fair. They bring about 400 children together that are in the foster care program together for a sports clinic. And the children get to hear from a professional sports player. They get to pick one of about 10 sports that they want to play. They get lessons all day long in that sport. And then the sports equipment that they use, they get to take home. It's a new piece of equipment. So the county plans the day, but Children's Fund pays for the jersey. We find the In-N-Out trucks that come out and feed them lunch, and we provide the sports balls for them.
The In-N-Out trucks. Man.
In-N-Out trucks.
I'm going to that one.
God bless In-N-Out. They fed 800 people at the last sports fair in June.
Okay. Excellent.
Eric, do you have any questions? Are you still live? I want to make sure that we also include you. Is Eric there?
I was on mute.
Oh.
I'm on the train, but I didn't have any questions. I think this fund got started by the guy that started Skater Brothers. Is that true?
Yeah.
That's right. Yes, together with the Honorable Patrick Morris, the two of them were founders.
Together with who?
I think Eric, a little bit fuzzy there, but I think he asked who the other one is, and it was the Honorable Patrick Morris, who was a Superior Court judge?
Superior Court judge at the time, later became a mayor of the city of San Bernardino.
Okay, gotcha.
And how did that all come together? Do you know that story?
How did that come together?
The two of them decided that the children in the county needed some additional assistance, and so together they formed Children's Fund.
But were they friends, or did they have a friendship? Do you know that story, or how did...
Oh, yes. they were friends. And when Patrick Morris, realized that the children needed more, he went to his friend and said, I'm thinking about this idea. Could you help me get it started? And Jack Brown agreed.
Mm.
Okay, and Jack Brown still stayed involved through all those years?
He was very involved up until when he passed away a few years ago. And as a matter of fact, his wife, Debbie Brown, has also been a chair of Children's Fund and has, been very involved in her own rights with Children's Fund as well. As a matter of fact, our boardroom is named after her.
Okay.
So I work with a charity out in Las Vegas. And we do what they usually do, because I actually didn't know this. Usually when there's kids in foster homes, depending on their story, sometimes we have kids that go from home to home. And I didn't realize that sometimes even the hygiene that we probably think it's normal or regular for us, like as easy as brushing your teeth or hydrating your skin, like the basic stuff to me seems so natural and normal, I think, because I was raised in a family and all of that stuff. But then when I started working with them and got involved, before I did radio, I did makeup. So they invited me to go talk about hygiene and the care of and the importance of it. How do you guys provide those type of classes, or do you guys provide classes like that for kids when it comes to hygiene, especially when we're having a transition of kids going from elementary to high school, and everybody starts growing up and smells start coming out of the body? Do you guys provide those type of classes for them?
We don't provide classes, but we do provide the hygiene kits.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm betting that the social workers or the case workers are providing the instruction, but we give them the kits that they need. Our stockroom at Children's Fund is full of backpacks and hygiene kits all the time.
Yeah, it's so interesting how sometimes I think, like I said, we take things for granted, because it seems normal. But when you have these type of situations, kids don't know. And it's when, the role of the parent usually comes in and is important to show kids what you do in hygiene and how important it is.
That's right. Just the basic needs. There's a wonderful principal in the city of San Bernardino, Mr. Velasco, and he told me that at his school he has children who siblings take turns going to school because there's just one pair of shoes, and the whole family shares one toothbrush. And so even outside of foster care, just where there's poverty, you'll see this a lot as well.
Wow, impressive. All right, we're going to go into a commercial break. When we come back, more with Children's Fund here in the Inland Empire.
We'll be right back to U-Turn after this commercial break. Don't go away.
Meet a friend, fall in love, save a life. Yucaipa Animal Placement Society is a nonprofit pet rescue facility for cats and dogs. Come and meet the wonderful homeless pets and be the person that makes all the difference to a pet in need. For more info, call 909-790-1440 or visit their website, yaps.org. That's yaps.org. The House of Ruth has been providing life-saving domestic violence services since 1977. Participation in House of Ruth programming is open to all battered women, men, and children. Domestic violence is a public health issue. 1 in 4 women are abused by their partner, and it's 1 in 7 for men. Even 1 in 3 teens are exposed to dating violence in their relationships. If you or someone you know needs help or support, House of Ruth can help. Call the House of Ruth 24-hour crisis hotline, 877-988-5559, or visit their website, houseofruthinc.org.
Music changing lives, making dreams come true.
If we can focus on it, so can you.
Fly higher than the sky, leave your mark on the moon.
Nothing is impossible, let the music guide you.
We are Music Changing Lives.
Tom, Nadia, and Eric are back with more only on the U-Turn radio show right here on KCAA.
Welcome back to U-Turn Radio. We have Cherie here from Children's Fund. I'm so happy to have you guys, or have you here. Like I said, we usually here at U-Turn cover politics, local politics, but we also believe big-hearted communities. So this show is really about the big-hearted community, and we're learning about Children's Fund with Cherie, who was telling us about what they do, the great work that you guys do. You guys work a lot with foster kids as well, pretty much with families, just pretty much with anybody who kind of needs or is in need. Speaking of being in need, or why do we need programs or organizations like Children's Fund? Why is there a need for these type of organizations in the county?
You know, the county does wonderful work as a safety net for our children, but you know, like most organizations, there are limited resources. So every year, the foster program keeps growing and growing as social workers are more aware of the children and the need of the neglect and the abuse that's happening. They're entering into child foster care more often. So the program's growing, but the resources aren't necessarily growing as fast as the need. So that's where Children's Fund kind of steps in and fills that gap.
What's the process like? How does, if like, for example, for somebody that's at school, or what have you seen where you can notice, or you start noticing there's a pattern of this kid where, you know, an organization like yours would get involved? Is there a certain pattern with these kids where people would say, hey, there's something going on in their house, they look further in, and then they contact you guys? How does that process work?
You know, I'm reading a great book by Dr. Ruby Payne called Emotional Poverty, and it's talking just about that. It was written for teachers to identify issues. And most of the time, if there's a behavior problem in the classroom, rarely is it just a behavior problem. Usually it's because the child's not getting enough sleep at night, maybe because there's some domestic abuse, or they didn't eat breakfast, and so they're very hungry. So this book helps the teachers identify. And so Children's Fund would get involved when the teacher might call Child Protective Services. Child Protective Services will then put the family under some sort of case management to see if there's something that they can do to help improve the family environment. And then if they identify that they just don't have a refrigerator, a lot of people are putting their food in ice chests, and maybe their food is perishing before they can get more ice, so the kids aren't eating. If that's the only thing that's keeping that child from getting a good meal, and it could possibly be the thing that has the child removed from the home because they don't have a working refrigerator, that's when they would call Children's Fund. We would step in and provide that refrigerator and keep that family whole. And, you know, for your listeners who are budget-minded or like to look at the return on investment on the kinds of things that we do, I'll give you these figures. It costs $10,000 to place one child in foster care. That's just the paperwork of the actual placement. So if we can prevent that from happening with a $600 refrigerator, that ROI is there. It's just a no-brainer.
Okay, so that $10,000 figure, that's basically just to pay the county employee, if you will, that's doing that paperwork.
That's right.
That
that's
okay.
For one day's work. That doesn't even talk about the thousands of dollars it costs a year to keep that child in foster care. That's
right.
just the placement. So,
okay, yeah, it was interesting. When we were preparing for the show, I actually wrote a question that said, "Are you guys kind of competitors with the county?" And obviously, the answer is no. You're more certainly co-worker type of arrangement.
Right, collaborators.
Yeah, collaborators is probably a good way to put it. You know, our mission statement is big-hearted communities, small government. Do you feel like that the county, the Inland Empire, could be served more effectively if the role that county child protective services plays were lessened, changed, and that, you know, assuming the resources are there, that service provided by nonprofits?
That's a tough question. I'm not really sure how to answer that. I think that nonprofits, just in their DNA, run very lean. Nonprofit staff and employees know that when you work for a nonprofit, you'll be making about 20% less than you would if you work for other industries, but we do it because our heart is there. And so you don't necessarily hear the same thing about government, that they run lean. You often hear the opposite. So I think that's maybe one way that we differ, is that we do know how to make a dollar last and go far, and we're very skilled at collaborating and creating partnerships. I think the County of San Bernardino is very good at that as well, and that's how our partnership came together. And, we exist because of the county, because they had that vision of creating a nonprofit. County government, any county, is not allowed to accept a charitable donation. That's why they had to form us, so that we could accept the donations on behalf of the county. That was 30 years ago. Now we serve all children, not just children under county case management.
Okay, I'm tracking with you there. That's an interesting stat you gave there, that and I'm sure you've experienced that the pay is going to be 20% less than normal. So obviously dedicated people out there working in the nonprofit
Absolutely.
world, there for a good cause, maybe not there for the dollars. A little bit of a pivot, but tell us about the Children's Assessment Center. Kind of how did that come about? What's the purpose of it? And how does that function and interact with county?
Okay. The Children's Assessment Center is a medical center that was formed about 20 years ago. It's since gone through some revisions, and about 5 years ago, their current building was dedicated. And if you think of a child who's been physically abused, they come in typically before the Children's Assessment Center, or what we call the CAC, was formed. They would have to disclose their abuse, either to a teacher or a trusting adult. So they've told their story to them. Then say that teacher says, "Oh, I think I might need to get CPS involved, so go tell the principal." Then the principal calls the county. Now they have to tell the story to a social worker. By the time they even get in front of a therapist, they've told the story 6 or 7 times. And for adults, when we retell traumatic events, it's sort of therapeutic and it helps us. For children, it's the opposite effect. Every time they tell that story, they're being re-traumatized. So at the CAC, the children come in, they get their forensic medical exam conducted by a pediatric forensic doctor who is trained to deal with children who've suffered trauma like this. They also know exactly what to look for and how to write it in the report, so when it goes to court, it's really not disputed, because these are experts. After that, they get taken into a interview room with a pediatric interviewer, forensic interviewer, who's also skilled and trained in doing this. But they're videotaped, and behind a mirrored glass wall sit all the professionals in place at one time. So you have the DA, you have the therapist, the social worker, any organization that's there to help the child. They all listen at the same time, so that child is telling that story one time. And then if the case goes to court, the children don't have to go testify and face their abuser again. They take the videotape from the interview, and it's admissible in court because it is done by a trained professional interviewer.
Okay.
Wow.
It's interesting because we had a guest a couple weeks ago, totally different subject, but his point was, I wish I could just do this once instead of having to do it, multiple places, multiple times, kind of an efficiency thing, but not for efficiency's sake. It's for the sake of taking care of that child, so they don't have to retell a bad story.
Exactly. We have a story of a little girl. We call her Princess Lisa because she was 4 years old, and she was brought in for suspected child abuse. But when they interviewed her, she did not trust adults, and she wasn't saying anything. And so the interviewer was very skilled. She didn't get her to disclose anything the first day. They brought her back a second day, and she had a pink princess costume, which is actually a therapy tool there. And she saw that she was eyeing the princess costume, so she asked her if she would like to put the costume on, and she did. And then the CAC has a therapy dog named Mac. He's an old English sheepdog. And they brought Mac in. So she was in her princess dress, and she had Mac, and she was petting him. And she slowly started to feel comfortable and disclosed her abuse, and she was able to be removed from the home and placed somewhere where she was safe.
Okay.
So that process can take depending on the kid as well, because you just mentioned, like, for example, in that story, the first time she wasn't able to talk about it. So it took, I mean, I don't know how long it took, but it took the second time for her to kind of open a little bit more. So how long is this type of process when you know, to get a kid out of that situation and get them help?
Yeah, I don't know exactly how long, what the stats are at the CAC for how long a child stays, but I do know that they do provide therapy there for a few weeks. And if the child ends up needing more therapy, then they refer to a therapist. But when the children come to the CAC, they get their medical attention and the emotional needs addressed as well for about 2 weeks.
Do you know, as far as the process for the foster parents, because I feel like we've talked about, you know, the kids when they need the help through the school and that type of stuff. What about on the other side, the parents that decide to become foster parents? What's the process for them? And do you guys work with those foster parents as well?
That is a good question. We do, in the sense that we partner with that department, but we don't provide services or provide goods for the actual foster parents. I'm guessing oftentimes if those foster parents identified a need for the child, then the social worker would get involved and come to Children's Fund and say, for example, maybe this child wants to play Little League, but the foster parents, you know, they don't have the resources for that. So they would ask Children's Fund to pay for that, and then we would most likely comply.
Gotcha. I was reading, it's interesting that you mentioned about the refrigerator, because you're saying that it's $10,000 per kid to go into foster care, when sometimes a family just needs something as simple as a refrigerator. I learned about a story where there's this young girl and they were living in the car because they lost their home, and she was late to school, so the school noticed that there was something different going on, and then finally she was able to tell one of the people that worked at the school, like, hey, we lost our home, we're pretty much staying in the car. But one of her biggest fear was that they would separate the family.
Yes.
Because, I mean, the parents were still working. It's just that they couldn't afford their home anymore. But it was really frightening for her to kind of like say, hey, like, we don't have a house, but the family's still together. Because there's times where it's not necessarily that they're getting abuse in that form, but it's just that the ends don't meet.
Right. It's just a situation that prevents them from having a home.
What else do you guys do for like stuff like that? Like, other than, would you guys provide like shelter at times? Like, I know Valley Oasis, for example, we had them, and sometimes they pay for like hotels for people that don't have a shelter, or they don't get time to get into a shelter. Sometimes, depending on the case, they'll get hotels for them. Do you guys do those type of things as well? Do you guys provide that stuff?
We have partnerships with organizations that do. So if a social worker were to come to us and say, I need somewhere for this family to sleep tonight, we would have a list of, 15 shelters in the area, and we'd say, why don't you try calling this one or this one? You'd be able to do that. Most of the social workers know that we don't run a shelter, so we wouldn't be able to provide that directly, but we do provide rental assistance. So if they just are falling short, or maybe they're getting a new apartment and they have money for rent, but they don't have the money for the deposit that they have to put down, we can provide that for them. It's a one-time, lifetime rental assistance, just to get people back on their feet. And the majority of the time, that's all they need. People aren't necessarily looking for a handout.
Yeah.
They just want a little bit of help so that they can stabilize their family, and then they'll be fine. And that's what Children's Fund is there for.
What is the end goal for each specific child, or even like families, when you guys get to work with them?
I love that question, because that reminds me of our vision statement. And at Children's Fund, our vision statement is a bright future for every child. So whether they need, help from abuse, or a scholarship for college, or they just need food on the table that one night, the end goal for us is that they will have a bright future.
How do you guys determine that? Like, how do you guys say, like, there, we finally met our goal here, our job is done with this particular person, and now we could go on to the next person or kid?
We're fortunate that a lot of the social workers and caseworkers that we work with will give us stories. A couple months later, we helped a woman who wanted to go back to school and get her GED, so she could do better for her children. And she needed a place, a way to get to school. So we gave her a bicycle. That's all she wanted was a bicycle. We gave her a bicycle. And about 9 months later, her caseworker wrote us a letter and said she has been using your bicycle. She has gone to school. She's getting her GED, and she's filling out applications to go to junior college.
Oh, nice.
So we get to hear stories on the back end of our assistants often.
That's awesome. It's good to have kind of like a balance, I feel like, because you need the good when you hear or you process a lot of challenging stories and stuff like that. You guys been around since 85, you said, right?
Yeah, 1986.
Or 86. What's your guys' goals like as an organization? What's the future looking like for you guys? What do you guys feel that the county needs that we haven't met as a county that the organization says our goal is to do this in the future?
In our mission statement, I talked about the 3 pillars at the beginning of the interview, and it's support, opportunity, and hope. So those are the 3 ways we want to serve our community by helping children with those 3 things. But I think, I would say that those 3 things. Sorry, I lost my train of thought.
What, we've heard, you've told some good stories. One of the things, being totally outside the system, my knowledge would really only be, you hear a lot of bad stories, in the press, that type of thing about child protective services, foster services, that type of thing. Do you have any bad stories? Like if we had have known about this, we being the Children's Fund, if we had have known about this, we could have prevented it.
I have read several case studies from the Children's Assessment Center, which details the abuse, toddlers who had adult bite marks on their body, those types of things. I think education is a big key, maybe shaken baby syndrome. If people know that if you shake a crying baby, you could kill them. I think that our partner agency, Children's Network, does a good job of getting that word out about shaken baby syndrome. I think that sort of stuff. But, it reminds me, and this goes back to your question, one of the things that we're doing a little bit differently than we did at the beginning. At the beginning, we were more of a safety net organization. But over the last 5 years or so, we've really started focusing on prevention programs. And, if we can stop children from being abused before they get abused, we won't have to try to send them to the CAC and give them hope and medical care. Let's just stop the abuse from the beginning. Some of the things we've done is we've developed through a partnership with several different organizations in San Bernardino County is something called Footsteps to Brilliance. And it's an app on a phone or a tablet that's a literacy app. And it's in English and Spanish. So you could learn Spanish or you could learn English, depending on which language you need to learn. And it teaches preschoolers how to read. And so there's all sorts of statistics about if you're reading, 1 million words, or you've been exposed to 1 million words by age 5, what that success looks like and what it doesn't look like if you haven't. And the gap between people living in poverty and people not living in poverty with how many words they've had. That's one thing. We've been looking at nurse-family partnership, where you give young families hands-on experience with a nurse right at birth so that they're learning how to parent effectively and properly so that you don't have medical issues or abuse or shaken babies, when frustration arises in the family, things like that. So we have a program committee that every month meets to talk about prevention programs.
Okay, and again, is that your role would be funding the prevention program? It's not actually holding a...
Correct, right. Okay. We wouldn't be the ones implementing. We would be the ones funding or going out and finding funding for it.
Right, okay, gotcha. Yeah, I noticed your Children's Fund Literacy Program says 40,000 books to the children of the San Bernardino County. How do you, it's again just purchasing the books for libraries, or where would they go?
Through partnerships. I believe that statistic was for a partnership with First Book that was a couple years ago. Cal State San Bernardino does a wonderful literacy day. I believe it's in September every year, and we go out and support that with bringing classrooms, go on field trips, and everybody dresses up like their favorite book character, and everybody leaves with a bag full of books. Just keeping books in front of children.
Is there an age group that you guys see more of in your organization?
I wouldn't say. I'd say it's pretty evenly spread out throughout their lifetime. We're helping children at college age with the scholarships. Abuse, unfortunately, can happen anytime throughout their life. And emergency needs is just whenever the family needs it. So I'd say all age groups, definitely all age groups.
I'm going to circle back to another, kind of leverage off another question I had. It sounds like Children's Fund is very much integrated with the county. And, again, you kind of hear about kids falling through cracks in the system. Given the Children's Fund's experience with that, what red tape would the Children's Fund kind of say, okay, let's remove this red tape so we can better serve the kids in the county?
That's a great question. I think our biggest barrier, it's not necessarily red tape, but our biggest barrier would be funding. We're fortunate to have great funders, but last year we served 118,000 children. We said earlier that there's 280,000 children in the county who live in poverty, so there's definitely need for those children. So if we were to have more funding, receive more grants for certain programs, we would be able to help all the children in the county, and that's really what we strive for. That's our BHAG, we like to call it, the big, hairy, audacious goal that we have at Children's Fund, is to help more children.
Okay, and when you say grants, is that a government dollar, or is that a nonprofit or a private dollar?
It's a nonprofit or a private dollar.
Okay.
One of our biggest funders is San Manuel Band of Mission Indians. They just provided a $1 million grant to benefit the Children's Assessment Center, and it was. We just finished year 3. It was a 3-year grant. We just finished year 3, and that was to fund more pediatric physicians at the CAC. And so we were happy we brought on 3, 1 a year.
Okay.
Do they get help once you guys come across working with that child and there's some type of abuse? Is there a process also, like you guys help them throughout, like getting through that abuse and stuff? Like, do you guys provide those type of helps as well, like therapy and so on?
At the Children's Assessment Center, they have a therapist that will help them for about 2 weeks, and usually that's what they need to get them into a stable foster care system or with a different family member away from their abuser. And if it's found that they still need continued therapy, then they're referred to another therapist. And once a child is identified as being abused, they are assigned a caseworker, and that caseworker will then follow them through the system and make sure they're getting the care that they need. We have 2 auxiliaries that help Children's Fund. It's 2 groups that raise money and help us. And one of them, they both make blankets for the Children's Assessment Center. One is called Bone Mares, and they're out of Redlands, and the other one is the West End Auxiliary out of Claremont. And they make those hand-tied blankets so that every child that goes to the Children's Assessment Center gets to pick their own blanket, and they get to take it with them. And I'll tell you, one of the best things I had was, I want to say 2 years ago, I went to a Kiwanis meeting, and this was a Kiwanis meeting where all the members were disabled adults, mentally disabled adults. And I was explaining about the Children's Assessment Center without going into too much detail because I didn't want to upset them. Afterwards, this young woman came up to me, and she didn't say anything. She just looked at me and she said, "I still have my CAC blanket."
Oh, wow.
Oh, wow.
And this was, years and years later, but
Wow.
she told me that it was something that she gave her comfort, and she's just always kept it.
It's so interesting because we also learned that at the Santa Claus interview. We had Santa Claus Inc. organization. We interviewed them, and they were telling us how they make a blanket and also a teddy bear, because and it's kind of like a care package. So when they transition from the home to a foster care, they have at least that one bag that's their bag.
Something that's warm and cuddly that they can cling to.
It's and I think it just goes back to what I kind of said. Like, for example, the hygiene stuff that it seems normal. Even a blanket can make such a difference in those situations that I would never think of. Something so simple can be something so much they mean so much more for a kid.
Yes, something of their own.
Right.
I've read a story of a foster youth in one of the scholarship essays that he said every time he would get moved. They get moved from foster home to foster home. Sometimes they just shuffle them around, maybe to make room for a family with siblings that's coming in, so a single child might get moved out to another home. And he said that it seemed like every time that happened, his clothes were in the washing machine. And when that's the case, you just have to leave your clothes behind. And so he'd get to the new place, and he would have no clothes, and he'd have to start from scratch.
How does that work out? Like, they can't get, like, is there a certain amount of time where it's like, hey, they're going to come pick you up and you kind of get what you get? Or what's that process like?
From what I understand, they oftentimes have no warning. They show up. Now, the San Bernardino County is trying to change this, but it used to be they would show up with a garbage bag. And everything that child owned, they usually had 15 to 20 minutes to put everything they wanted to take with them. It all had to fit in one garbage bag, and then they could take that with them.
Because they don't know where they're going to be placed?
They don't know where they're going to be placed. A lot of times if they're being removed from the home, maybe the family was had a social worker who would come and do, family checks, and they would find that it's an unsafe environment for the child now. So the child would leave with them right then. And they would say, okay, unfortunately, I need to take you with me. Here's a garbage bag. You have 20 minutes.
Wow.
Now this is, let me backtrack. This is a home where a child is being abused or being taken out of. This isn't a foster home.
It's what I described was a home where the child's being removed from their parents.
Okay.
Gotcha.
All right. Because I was like, wow, you're in a foster family and you got 15 minutes and you can't take your clothes. That's pretty harsh.
Yeah, I can't speak to that. I'm not sure how much warning they get.
Okay.
I'm sure on a case-by-case basis it's a little different.
Okay.
Before we run out of time, tell us about the Computer Camp Care campaign that is coming up soon.
Oh, great. From April 1st to April 30th, we are running a fundraising campaign for Computer Camp. And what Computer Camp is every graduating foster care senior. So if you're in foster care and you're a senior graduating from high school, from the Independent Living Program and Children's Fund together, we're partnering on providing them with a free laptop computer, a printer, software, and an all-day hands-on computer training. And that's about 120 kids that get that every year, and it costs about $60,000. So this year we decided we were going to do a fundraising campaign, and a lot of people really believe in this. You can't search for a job, you can't apply for a job, and you can't do your homework really unless you're using a computer. And a lot of the foster kids were using computers in libraries and stuff like that. So to have the computer at their home is going to be a big win for them.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for being with us. That's childrensfund.org, where you can go and get involved and get more information. Is that...
We're spinning. You can't
Are we off?
hear it. Yeah, it's okay.
Oh, we're still on.
Yeah,
Okay, so let me make sure I say this. For more information, and if you guys want to get involved, please go to childrensfund.org. You can also call 909-379-0000. And that wraps it up for us here at U-Turn Radio.
KCAA Loma Linda, 1050 AM, 106.5 FM, and now 102.3 FM.
CNBC. Thanks to yesterday's announcement from the Fed that there are no plans to hike interest rates this entire year, average